Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues now, and make sure to stay tuned to catch me, Mike Gallagher, coming up at 9, only on AM 560, The Answer.
Dan and Amy, Brock Long, FEMA director, is giving an update on the federal government's response to Harvey right now. A little bit earlier, Joel Osteen, who had come under fire for not opening his megachurch in Houston to those seeking shelter, responded to what actually went down versus what the press had reported about his decision-making.
The church has always been open. Our doors, we received shelter victims just the first day or two. But there was a time, Chris, that the place was flooded. That's not a true statement, people that say that. We have floodgates right behind me over to the right, and it was within a foot of that. So there was a safety issue the first day or two. I mean, you're seeing, you know as well as I do, this was a huge storm. But the idea that we wouldn't receive people, I mean, we've been here in this community for 60 years. In Allison, Tropical Storm Allison, we housed 3,000 people, so we've always been open. There's a big shelter 4 miles away, the city shelter that has all the dormitories. Once they filled up, people started coming here, but how this notion got started that we're not a shelter and we're not taking people in is a false narrative.
Okay, that's his response. For a response on tribalism, political tribalism, which, of course, we've talked a lot about in the wake of Charlottesville, and which we see now the other end of this, people just helping other people. You've seen some of the best of humanity in response to the natural disaster in Houston, which is also somewhat man-made disaster, but we already discussed that. And we see some of the worst, too, with the looting and whatnot and the politicization. But for more on this topic, as well as national security threats in the East, we're pleased to be joined by Cliff May, president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Cliff, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you guys.
So while all this has been going on in Texas, we had Kim Jong-un, a North Korean dictator, fire a missile over Japan. So still getting saber rattling from Kim Jong-un, even though he backed down after Trump suggested that he was ready to go toe-to-toe with the tin horn dictator. What should we understand about Kim Jong-un's latest missile test, quote unquote?
Well, fairly obviously, he is as bellicose as ever. He is as threatening as ever, and he continues to develop his capabilities. Back in 1994, when President Clinton concluded what was called an agreed framework with North Korea, that was meant to prevent him from getting nuclear weapons. The agreement failed. He went on to get nuclear weapons, and he's been working on missiles that can deliver them not just to South Korea, not just to Japan, not just to Hawaii, not just to the West Coast, but anywhere in the United States. This is a problem that's been left to metastasize for about a quarter of a century. And now there are no good solutions. There are bad solutions and there are worse solutions, and wisdom consists in being able to discriminate between the two.
Well, do you think we should have a militarized strike sooner rather than later?
No, I would never rush something like that. I believe that one of the things going on at the Pentagon is an examination of what are all of our options militarily. It's not simply a strike, but you have to decide what kind of weapons, where, what are your targets going to be, what do you do about the artillery along the DMZ, along the demilitarized zone, all of which can reach Seoul, which is a very large population city. I don't think you ever want to rush something like this. On the other hand, 25 years is a little too long to kick the can down the road.
Speaking of the U.S. military, General Mattis, Secretary of Defense, announcing that he's going to slow walk the trans ban that the president
tweeted about.
Well, he issued it. That he wants to study the issue to determine impact on the military. So, study the issue is the political way to slow walk something. What's there to study, and what's Mattis trying to do, and do you agree with it?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as a slow walk. I think what the president has asked is that there be such a study, and that there be good understanding of whether or not having transgenders in the military, including the entitlement of getting operations to make oneself go from one gender to another, is useful or not for national security purposes. And I think the military should be primarily and maybe exclusively about national security, not about social engineering. So I think General Mattis is doing due diligence. It's exactly what he should do. He'll come out with a study, he'll report, and he'll tell the president what he sees. And we'll decide whether or not this is good or bad for the United States of America as a whole.
Well, how many transgender people are in the military? I mean, roughly. Who are we talking about?
Probably not a lot. I do think I do have a question. You can go ahead, but I do have a question about if somebody joining the military and then saying, now I want to go through a series of operations. I want the taxpayers to pay for it because I've decided I want to reassign my gender.
This is a political two-step. I mean, come on. Yeah, what's real? The real hurdle for military readiness for having the best fighting force in the world is whether or not we allow transgenders in the military or not. I mean, give me a break. Come on.
The idea that this is what we're discussing at a time when the North Koreans are firing missiles that sooner or later will be able to carry nuclear weapons to Los Angeles and further is ridiculous. The fact that this is a big controversy in America when we have the Iranians moving ahead and towards nuclear weapons and proclaiming death to America is what they intend. We are so sidetracked now by these issues, and there is so much anger in America, and the anger is not directed towards our enemies abroad who say they want to kill us. The anger is directed at each other. It's really astonishing, and I'm sure our enemies are mightily encouraged by what they see happening here in the U.S. This is exactly what they want and exactly what they figured that would happen here.
Well, it's because the left is on the advance when it comes to changing over American culture, and some people aren't down with that. So that's what happens.
I think that's quite correct. You have the Nazis saying they want only one race, the whites, to rule. You have the left saying they want rights to be dependent on which victim group you're in, and certain groups will be considered privileges and their rights will be taken away. This is not what America was founded on. On the other hand, those same people on the left you're describing, they say, oh, the founders had slaves, therefore we should not have any respect for them. We should tear down their statues, not just statues of Robert E. Lee, but as you've seen, there have been statues of Abraham Lincoln vandalized. We've had a minister in Chicago calling for George Washington name to be taken off everything, I guess, including the capital city. This is where we are, and it's a very bad place to be in the midst of what I believe to be a global conflict being fought against America and the West by very serious enemies.
Well, this dovetails with your piece about the politics of grievance and revenge, and you make the point that the modern terrorists are revanchists, like Putin is. Their motivation is to reverse historical territorial losses, and this is part of what we need to understand if we're going to be effective in turning them back.
Exactly. This is my column from last week in the Washington Times. Revanchism is a word you don't hear used very much anymore, used to a great deal. But when you see what happened, for example, in Barcelona, and you see what the Islamic State said about it, they said they wanted to fill the hearts of the crusader with terror in the land of Andalusia. In other words, there are various places that once were conquered by Muslim armies that these people, the Islamists, the jihadists, believe they must take back from Christians, from Jews, from Hindus. I'm talking now about Barcelona, I'm talking about Palestine, I'm talking about Kashmir, and that's what they're fighting for. Now, some people who find the talk about the ideology of Islamism disturbing, some people who don't like to talk even more about the theology that underrides that ideology, understand what this is also about. It's about revanchism. It's about conquest, one of the probably the oldest impulse there is in the world.
All right. He is Cliff May, president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. The piece that you want to check out, Replacing Patriotism with Tribalism, as he said in the Washington Times. You can also get it at defenddemocracy.org, which is his organization's website. Cliff, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio